In the summer of 2025, Jordan Peterson nearly died after developing pneumonia and sepsis that left him in the ICU for weeks. His daughter later revealed that the illness began after he was exposed to heavy mold while cleaning out his late father's basement, triggering what she called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, a rare and unofficial life-threatening immune condition. He reportedly suffered nerve damage, extreme sensitivities to medication, and even paralysis. It wasn't the first time Peterson's health had spiraled. Years earlier, he'd endured a near-fatal benzodiazepine withdrawal that required months of treatment abroad. This latest crisis left him bedridden and fighting for his life once again, with his daughter saying that for days, doctors weren't sure if he'd survive. Now, months later, Peterson is slowly recovering. He has reportedly regained much of his mobility, is speaking and reading again, and continues intensive physical therapy from home. His daughter says he's still very fragile but improving daily, though his public appearances, lectures, and recordings remain on hold as he focuses on regaining full strength after what she called the closest he's ever been to dying. In 2010, 7-year-old Aiyana Stanley-Jones was sleeping on her grandmother's couch in Detroit when a police raid quickly turned deadly. Officers were filming for the A&E show The First 48 as they stormed the home in search of a murder suspect, tossing in a flash grenade before bursting through the door. Within seconds, a bullet fired by Officer Joseph Weekly struck Aiyana in the head, killing her instantly. The officer claimed the gun discharged accidentally after a struggle, but witnesses said he just fired blindly into the darkened home. No one was ever convicted for her death. Aiyana would have turned 25 this year, a haunting reminder of how a child's life was tragically cut short in a moment meant for TV. In the early 1980s, South Korean photographer Lee Dong-sik was convicted of murdering a woman just so he could photograph her dying. Reports from a Korean newspaper say he met the victim, gave her a drink laced with potassium cyanide, and took more than 20 photographs as she slowly died in agony. During questioning, he claimed he wanted to capture the moment of death as part of his art. He was soon arrested, charged with her murder, and executed 4 years later. This was the moment when a typical news broadcast turned into an outright nightmare for CBS reporter Lara Logan. On the night of February 11, 2011, as Egypt erupted in celebration over the resignation of their president, Lara Logan was in Cairo documenting the historic moment with her CBS crew for more than an hour, until their camera battery suddenly died and they stopped to regroup. Her local translator then heard the crowd say things like, "Let's take her pants off," and a night of celebration quickly turned into pure terror for the journalist. Suddenly separated from her bodyguards and translators, Logan was swallowed by a crowd of 200 to 300 men who suddenly turned on her in a violent sexual assault. Her clothes were torn, she was dragged, beaten, and by her account, raped with their hands while others filmed on cell phones. She struggled to breathe as her ribcage was compressed and her limbs went numb, convinced she was gonna die. After about 30 minutes, a group of Egyptian women and 24 soldiers forced their way into the mob and carried her away. Logan was hospitalized, flown home the next day, and later went public to break the silence about mass sexual assaults in protest crowds and the risks constantly faced by women in volatile environments of men. This was the real-life Mean Girls, only instead of high school drama, it ended in unspeakable horror. When 12-year-old Shanda Sharer opened her front door one January night in 1992, she had no idea she was walking into one of the most horrific murder plots in Indiana history. Shortly after Shanda moved into town, classmate Melinda Loveless, jealous over Shanda's relationship with Loveless's ex-girlfriend, lured Shanda from her home under false pretenses with the help of 3 female accomplices. At a remote site called the Witch's Castle, they stripped, beat, and stabbed Shanda several times, inflicting painful but non-fatal wounds. Shanda, still alive, was forced into a car trunk and endured hours of torture, including burns from a cigarette lighter and a brutal sexual assault with a tire tool, causing severe physical trauma. The next morning, the group doused the conscious but weakened girl with gasoline and set her on fire, as she eventually died from thermal injuries and smoke inhalation. Her charred body was found in a field later that day, and the 4 perpetrators were arrested after one of the accomplices boasted to peers. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this entire case is that as of October of 2025, all of the perpetrators are now free, including the ringleader Melinda Loveless, who was released on parole in 2019. Here's a photo of an archaeologist cradling the cast of a young child who died instantly in the Pompeii eruption in 79 AD. The plaster casts of Pompeii's victims were created from empty voids in hardened ash, molds where human bodies once lay. Archaeologists filled them with plaster, revealing faces twisted in terror, immortalized in volcanic stone. A 3rd century BC Roman mosaic shows a skeleton reclining next to bread and wine, raising a cup with the words, "Be cheerful, enjoy life." In 2023, a 2,700-year-old 18-ton Assyrian statue was unearthed in Iraq, its massive form depicting a god whose worshippers died off millennia ago. It had waited underground since long before the birth of Jesus Christ. This portrait of an unidentified Egyptian man was laid over his mummified body nearly 2,000 years ago during the Roman period in Egypt. Painted on linden wood using colored wax, it was meant to preserve his likeness for eternity. Hidden for centuries beneath Italian forests, a massive Etruscan pyramid altar was rediscovered in the 1990s. Carved directly into rock 2,600 years ago, it may have once run red with the blood of ritual offerings to forgotten gods. Carved from mammoth ivory 33,000 years ago, this tiny bird from a prehistoric cave in Germany is the oldest known depiction of a creature. As far as we know, the artist who made it never lived to see a wheel, a written word, or the dawn of recorded history. In January of 2015, a walker passing through Squirrelwood Scout Camp near Doncaster, England, stumbled upon a sight so grimly bizarre that it made national headlines. Wedged headfirst in a rabbit hole was the body of 50-year-old Stephen Winfrey, a local hunter who had gone missing the day before after taking his dog out to catch rabbits. Investigators pieced together that Winfrey likely tried to reach into the burrow to grab his prey when his torso became trapped at an angle so tight he couldn't breathe or pull himself free. He eventually suffocated in the confined space, his legs still sticking out of the earth as if frozen mid-stride. When rescuers found him, his body was so firmly wedged that it took hours to dislodge, and soil had compacted around his face like a coffin of dirt. His loyal dog was found alive tied to a nearby tree but was trembling and dehydrated, having watched helplessly as its owner got stuck and slowly ran out of air. The coroner ruled his horrifying death an accidental asphyxiation. This photo shows 23-year-old Jaleel Smith Riley breaking down in tears as he receives a life without parole sentence in a Cincinnati courtroom for the 2013 fatal shooting of 22-year-old Portia Brooks during a botched car robbery. He had attempted to retract his guilty plea and expressed remorse, but the judge denied both motions, citing the brutality of the crime. In the courtroom, the victim's mother held her daughter's ashes, while her sister said the sentence was the only just outcome for the loss inflicted on her family. At age 21 in 1974, Robert Maudsley strangled John Farrell to death after Farrell showed him photos of abused children. He then turned himself in and went on to kill a convicted child molester at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, and in 1978 murdered 2 more predatory cellmates in a single afternoon, coldly telling the guards there will be 2 short on the roll call. Deemed too dangerous even for high-security inmates, in 1983, authorities locked him in a Hannibal Lecter-like glass cage in the basement of an English prison. He typically spends 23 of every 24 hours alone there with no contact with other prisoners. By 2023, he had spent a record 16,000 days in solitary and will likely remain in isolation for the rest of his life.
Bang! Dead. Gone. Why? Because Alexander Devontae Dickey, who was arrested 39 times, 25 felonies, was on the street.
That was the father of 22-year-old Logan Federico, his voice trembling with anger and disbelief over what the justice system allowed to happen to his daughter. Despite nearly 40 arrests and more than 25 felony charges, 30-year-old Alexander Dickey was still walking free when he broke into the South Carolina home where Logan Federico was sleeping. He dragged her naked from her bed in the dark and forced her onto her knees on the floor. With a stolen 12-gauge shotgun pressed to her chest, he pulled the trigger at point-blank range, killing her instantly, execution style. Logan's father said he had to live with the knowledge that his daughter's killer, a man who had cycled in and out of prison dozens of times, should have been locked away permanently long before he was given the chance to carry out such a monstrous act. In 2022, 2 men sued Universal Studios for $5 million after paying $4 to watch the film Yesterday, only to find that Ana de Armas, prominently featured in the trailer, had been cut from the film entirely. They claimed it was false advertising, arguing that the studio sold them a lie. A judge briefly agreed that trailers could legally count as commercial speech, but the case was ultimately dismissed. In 2001, a Hooters waitress named Jody Berry won a company contest promising a new Toyota, but when she was blindfolded to receive her prize, her manager handed her a Toyota doll instead. Berry sued for fraud and won, eventually walking away with a real Toyota car. Alan Heckard filed an $832 million lawsuit against Michael Jordan and Nike, claiming he'd suffered years of emotional pain and unwanted attention because people kept mistaking him for the basketball legend. He eventually dropped the case. In 1996, Denise Rossi won $1.3 million in the lottery, then filed for divorce just 11 days later to keep it from her husband. 2 years later, a stray letter exposed her secret. A judge ruled she'd committed fraud by hiding the winnings and ordered a brutal punishment. She had to give her ex-husband every penny of the $1.3 million she tried to run away with. Pop icon Britney Spears has lived through one of the most disturbing public downfalls in modern celebrity history. After a 2007 breakdown that saw her shave her head and attack a paparazzi's car, she was placed under an involuntary psychiatric hold, and shortly after, her father gained full control of her life through a conservatorship that lasted 13 years. During that time, Britney claims she was drugged, forced into rehab, and even denied basic freedoms like driving, marriage, or spending her own money. Even after regaining her freedom in 2021, Britney has described the trauma as something that crushed her soul, leaving her forever haunted by the years she spent as a prisoner of her own fame. This driver was extremely lucky they lived in Australia, where cars are right-hand drive. At just 9 years old, Louis Joseph Xavier, the oldest son of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, suffered a fatal injury after a fall. He admitted he'd been pushed but refused to name the culprit, afraid they'd be punished. The wound became infected and he died in agony soon after, but never ratted on his friend. His death shattered his parents. Both would be executed just 2 years later, as the monarchy he was meant to inherit completely crumbled. In 2011, one of the most horrific workplace murders unfolded inside a Lululemon store in Bethesda, Maryland. When employees arrived one morning, they found the shop in pure chaos. Blood smeared across the walls and floor, broken merchandise scattered everywhere, and 2 female employees lying in the back room. One of them was 30-year-old Jana Murray, beaten and slashed beyond recognition. The other woman, her co-worker Brittany Norwood, was tied up and claiming that 2 masked men had broken in and attacked them both. But investigators quickly realized her story didn't add up. Forensics revealed that Murray had sustained at least 331 separate injuries from a hammer, wrench, knife, rope, box cutter, and metal stand, and that she had been alive for all of them, her body showing signs of conscious struggle throughout the 15-minute assault. It turned out Norwood had killed her coworker after being caught trying to steal merchandise, then staged the entire scene and bound herself to make it look like a robbery. The crime completely shocked the nation, not just for its savagery, but for the fact that every blow, cut, and stab was inflicted by someone that Murray had entrusted to lock up the store beside her. Moments before tragedy, passenger Dave Halley snapped a photo of his wife Kim and their 4-year-old daughter Megan, smiling from their seats on Malaysian Airlines flight MH17, unaware it would be their final picture. Minutes after takeoff, the plane was struck by a Russian missile at 33,000 feet, exploding midair and scattering wreckage and bodies across miles of Ukrainian farmland. Every one of the 298 passengers and crew was killed instantly. Some of their belongings and passports later found among the debris of what investigators called one of the most awful war crimes in aviation history. Yet Russia continues to deny involvement to this day, still refusing to extradite those responsible or pay any reparations for the awful tragedy. A Colorado man named Wayne Watson developed a rare and irreversible lung condition known as popcorn lung after years of eating and inhaling the buttery fumes from multiple bags of microwave popcorn every day. The artificial butter flavoring contained diacetyl, a toxic chemical that can scar and destroy airways over time. In 2012, a jury awarded him $7.2 million after ruling that the popcorn maker failed to warn consumers of the dangers. Doctors said his lungs had deteriorated so badly that they resembled those of an industrial worker exposed to chemical vapors for years, all because of his daily snack habit. On June 18, 2011, Amy Winehouse took the stage in Belgrade for what would become her final major performance and one of the most painful nights of her career. She stumbled through songs, slurred her words, and forgot entire lyrics as the crowd began to boo. Serbian media called it a national embarrassment, and even government officials described the show as a disgrace. Within days, the rest of her European tour was canceled so she could recover, but she never did. Just over a month later, on July 23, 2011, Amy was found dead in her London home from alcohol poisoning at the young age of 27. Ilse Koch, wife of Buchenwald commandant Karl Otto Koch, became infamous for her sadism towards prisoners during the Holocaust. Survivors claimed she ordered beatings, stole from inmates, and selected those with distinctive tattoos to be killed so their skin could be turned into lampshades, book covers, and gloves. Nicknamed the Bitch of Buchenwald, she was convicted of war crimes, sentenced to life in prison, and died of suicide in 1967. Her name forever tied to some of the most grotesque atrocities of the Nazi regime. At his 2011 Halloween party, Neil Patrick Harris served a cake designed to look like the rotting corpse of Amy Winehouse, complete with a mangled face, matted hair, blood-red frosting, a cigarette hanging from its mouth, and a tag reading, "The Corpse of Amy Winehouse." The photo resurfaced years later and drew massive backlash, especially since Winehouse had died from alcohol poisoning just 3 months before the party. Harris later apologized, calling it a regrettable choice. Many animal shelters refuse to let black cats be adopted around Halloween time, fearing they'll be tortured, sacrificed, or used as props in satanic rituals. Legendary illusionist Harry Houdini died on Halloween night in 1926 after his appendix burst, reportedly triggered when a fan punched him to test his strength. Before his death, he promised his wife he'd try to contact her from beyond the grave every Halloween, sparking seances that still continue to this day. In 1990, 32-year-old magician Joe Burrows tried to outdo Houdini by being buried alive in a plexiglass coffin under 7 tons of dirt and cement, but the coffin collapsed instantly, crushing him to death on Halloween night just like his idol. Statistically, Halloween is the deadliest day of the year for child pedestrians by far. Kids are 3 times more likely to be hit by a car while trick-or-treating than any other day of the year. 8-year-old Timothy Bryan died on Halloween night in 1974 after eating cyanide-laced candy given to him by his own father, who hoped to cash in on his life insurance policy. The Candyman case sparked the nationwide panic about poisoned Halloween candy, but it was the only true case of it happening ever recorded. In dozens of states, registered sex offenders are required by law to keep their porch lights off, avoid Halloween decorations, and have no contact with children on Halloween. Some cities even enforce curfews and random compliance checks on Halloween night. On an October night in 1997, students at Cornell University woke up to find a pumpkin impaled on the tip of the 173-foot spire of McGraw Tower. No one saw it placed there, no ropes, cranes, or ladders were ever found, and no one took credit. The pumpkin stayed perched for months, slowly rotting through the winter before being removed in March, an incredible Halloween mystery that remains unsolved to this day. In 2015, doctors were baffled when a healthy 5-year-old boy's sodium levels skyrocketed inside a New York hospital, setting off a mystery that would expose a horror no one saw coming. For years, 26-year-old Ilse Spears told friends and followers that her son Garnett was chronically ill, documenting his mysterious sickness online to garner sympathy. But when the 5-year-old was hospitalized in New York, doctors found his sodium levels had mysteriously spiked to near-fatal levels, 182 milliequivalents per liter, so abnormally high that staff initially thought it was a lab error. Surveillance footage later showed Lacey taking her son into a private room and secretly administering large amounts of salt through his feeding tube. Hours later, Garnett suffered massive brain swelling and passed away. Investigators later found feeding bags in her apartment coated with salt residue, along with Google searches for dangers of high sodium in children. Spears was eventually sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, her case becoming a chilling example of Munchausen syndrome by proxy taken to the extreme. As a teenager, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's family was struggling so badly that they were evicted from their apartment in Hawaii. Not long afterwards, Johnson witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His mother stepped out of her car on a busy highway and began walking towards oncoming traffic. Luckily, Dwayne sprinted after her and pulled her back just before she was hit. Years later, he revealed that the incident was a suicide attempt brought on by their dire situation, saying he never forgot how powerless he felt in that moment. In 2008, 39-year-old Stefan Miller was helping his cousin, Hollywood animal trainer Randy Miller, film a promo video with their 700-pound grizzly bear named Rocky, the same bear that starred alongside Will Ferrell in Semi-Pro that same year. But in an instant, the trained bear turned deadly. Without warning, Rocky suddenly lunged and bit deep into Stefan's neck, crushing his spine and severing an artery. He bled out within minutes as horrified crew members looked on. The bear, raised in captivity and for years considered to be safe, proved that even the most well-trained predator can revert back to its instincts in a heartbeat. This was the moment a couple of Christian extremists realized their lives were over, as courtroom footage shows Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari standing at their arraignment after their 10-month-old daughter Mary died from severe malnutrition and dehydration caused by prolonged neglect. Prosecutors revealed the infant weighed just 8 pounds at the time of her death and showed signs of extreme starvation after being deprived of adequate food, water, and medical care for weeks. The medical examiner ruled her death entirely preventable, ruling she died from starvation rather than illness. The parents later claimed extreme isolated religious beliefs led them to reject modern medical care and even attempted to use those beliefs as a defense in court. In 2019, Seth Welch was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree felony murder, while his wife Tatiana also received life in prison but with the possibility of parole. The judge said their actions showed an utter disregard for human life, ruling that religious belief does not excuse starving a child to death. In February of 2022, 25-year-old Taylor Shabiznis killed her boyfriend in one of Wisconsin's most horrific crimes in modern history. During sex in the basement of his mother's home, she strangled 24-year-old Shad Therian to death after a night of heavy drug use. But what she did next was beyond comprehension. She continued to violate his body for hours, then used knives and a chainsaw to slice him apart, deliberately placing his severed head in a bucket and leaving it in plain view for his mother to find the next morning. When the woman went downstairs, she came face to face with the unimaginable, her son's head staring back at her from inside a blood-filled bucket. Shabiznis later told police they'd have fun trying to find the rest of him. And her violent behavior didn't end there. During a 2023 court hearing, she suddenly lunged at her own attorney, knocking him to the ground before being restrained by deputies. Shabiznis was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole. At the height of her Disney fame, Ashley Tisdale was battling serious health and mental struggles. Since childhood, she had suffered from severe anxiety and panic attacks, and during her High School Musical years, they became so intense that she was repeatedly rushed to hospitals believing she was having heart attacks until doctors realized it was panic. The stress left her barely eating and constantly exhausted. In 2007, at 21 years old, months of unexplained pain led doctors to discover a tumor in her breast that required surgery, later confirmed to be benign. Years later, she revealed she developed alopecia, causing patches of her hair to fall out from stress and autoimmune issues, saying the pressure to appear fine through the years came at a real cost to her health. In January of 2026 in Pennsylvania, 11-year-old Clayton Dietz fatally shot his adoptive father, Douglas Dietz, on the night of the boy's own birthday after his Nintendo Switch was taken away from him. Police say the child waited until his father fell asleep on the couch, found the key to his gun safe, loaded a handgun, and shot him once in the head. The boy later admitted he did it out of anger over losing his game console. Douglas Dietz died at the scene, while prosecutors charged the boy with criminal homicide and moved to try him as an adult, calling the case one of the most disturbing juvenile killings in recent years. On Halloween morning in 2025, former TV news anchor Angie Mock was arrested in Wichita, Kansas, after allegedly stabbing her 80-year-old mother Anita to death inside their home. When police arrived, Mock was reportedly covered in blood with cuts all over her hands, while her mother was found deceased in bed with multiple stab wounds. Dispatch audio captured Mock claiming she stabbed her mother to save herself, though no evidence has yet explained what that meant. The once trusted newswoman, who had anchored for Fox 2 St. Louis, is now charged with first-degree murder and held on a $1 million bond. In 1998, Thai pop star Ruangsak Loichasak boarded Thai Airways Flight 261 and took seat 11A. Moments later, the plane crashed, killing 101 people on board, but Ruangsak miraculously survived, earning himself the nickname Iron Bones. Nearly 27 years later, history repeated itself when an Air India flight went down in 2025, and once again, the sole survivor was seated in 11A. Ever since, that seat number has become one of the fastest to sell out, since customers believe it will give them a higher chance of survival if the plane happens to crash. Here's a photo of American soldier Joseph Dwyer carrying a wounded Iraqi boy away from crossfire during the Iraq War in 2003, an image that became a symbol of compassion amid chaos. After returning home, Dwyer was diagnosed with severe PTSD, became unemployed, and suffered a marital breakdown as his mental health deteriorated into paranoia and violent delusions. In 2008, after years of psychological struggle and substance abuse, Joseph Dwyer died from a drug overdose, a quiet end to a life permanently altered by the horrors of war. In 2025, 15-year-old woodworking apprentice Muhammad Kendirsi died after coworkers assaulted him with a high-pressure air hose during what they reportedly called a workplace prank. The force of the compressed air caused massive internal damage, including rupturing of his intestines and severe internal bleeding. Doctors said the sudden air pressure led to rapid organ failure and shock, and despite emergency treatment, his injuries were too extensive for him to be saved. Authorities treated the incident as a violent assault, and the case sparked massive outrage over deadly hazing and abuse in the workplace. In July of 2025, 43-year-old Clinton Brink and his wife Kristen were hiking with their two young daughters, ages 7 and 9, at Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas when they were suddenly attacked on a remote trail by a stranger armed with a knife. Witnesses later described the man as having an unsettling death stare before he suddenly launched the assault without warning or provocation. Clinton immediately fought off the attacker to buy time for his family to escape, while Kristen ran the girls to safety and then returned to help her husband. Both parents were fatally stabbed during the struggle. The children were later found uninjured about a half a mile away, having been protected by their parents' final acts of bravery. A 5-day multi-state manhunt later ensued after investigators discovered blood at the scene that didn't belong to either victim. The suspect, 28-year-old teacher Andrew James McGann, was eventually located and arrested at a barbershop in Springdale, Arkansas, where he was in the middle of getting a haircut to alter his appearance. In 2017, Tennessee doctor Paul Locus was celebrating Halloween dressed as the Joker when he got an emergency call that one of his patients was in labor. Still wearing full makeup, green hair, and a purple suit, he rushed straight to the hospital to deliver the baby. The mother later said she couldn't stop laughing as her baby entered the world in the hands of a Batman villain. Here's a photo of a Turkish soldier whose face was severely disfigured by artillery fire during the Battle of Gallipoli in World War I. He likely didn't survive long enough for any meaningful reconstruction to be attempted. In the 1830s, Spanish-born criminal Diogo Alves terrorized Lisbon by robbing travelers on the city's aqueducts and throwing dozens to their deaths below, earning him the nickname the Aqueduct Murderer. After later killing a wealthy family during a botched robbery, he was caught and hanged in 1841. Scientists then severed his head and preserved it in formaldehyde for study, where it still sits on display at the University of Lisbon, eerily intact nearly 2 centuries later. This disturbing footage shows a former University of South Florida PhD chemistry student secretly poisoning his neighbor's home during a dispute over noise. In 2023, Xu Ming Li was caught on a neighbor's security cam repeatedly entering the hallway of their apartment building and injecting liquid opioids into a family's front door and into their doorframe. Soon afterward, the family inside began suffering from unexplained vomiting, severe dizziness, headaches, and breathing problems. Police later determined Li had been targeting them because of an ongoing argument over noise. Investigators said he used his chemistry background to introduce the drugs into their home without them knowing. Lee was arrested, expelled from the university, and later deported from the United States. On March 11, 2011, as the Tohoku earthquake struck Japan, 24-year-old city employee Miki Endo stayed at her post broadcasting emergency warnings about the incoming tsunami. Over loudspeakers across the town, she repeatedly urged residents to seek higher ground, continuing even as floodwaters began rushing into the streets and into her building. She refused to leave her position and kept warning the public until the tsunami completely submerged her office building. Miki didn't survive, but her final broadcasts are credited with helping to save thousands of lives. In 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddox left his home in Woodland Park, Colorado for a short walk and was never seen again. 7 years later, his mummified body was discovered inside the chimney of an abandoned cabin less than a mile from his house. He was found in a fetal position wearing only a thermal shirt with his other clothes neatly folded nearby. The coroner ruled his death an accident, suggesting he tried to enter the cabin through the chimney and became trapped. But the bizarre details, his position, the missing clothing, and the fact that the chimney was blocked off from the inside have fueled theories that Joshua didn't end up there by accident but was placed there by someone else. In 1930, a mannequin appeared in the window of a bridal shop in Chihuahua, Mexico, so lifelike that locals swore she wasn't made of wax at all. Her glass eyes, detailed hands, and visible veins fueled rumors that she was the embalmed body of the shop owner's daughter, a bride who died on her wedding day. Nicknamed La Pasqualita, she's remained on display for nearly a century, still leaving visitors to wonder if they're looking at a mannequin or a corpse in a wedding dress. On June 5, 1986, 24-year-old New York City model Marla Hansen was asked by her landlord Stephen Roth to meet outside a Manhattan bar to collect an $850 security deposit he owed her. As they walked away, Hansen was ambushed by 2 men Roth had hired. One attacker restrained her head while the other slashed her face with razor blades, carving deep wounds across her cheeks as Roth stood by and watched. The attack required more than 150 stitches, leaving her with permanent disfigurement that effectively ended her modeling career. Hansen survived after extensive reconstructive surgery, and investigators later determined that Roth had ordered the attack after she rejected his romantic advances. He and the 2 attackers were convicted and sentenced to 5 to 15 years in prison. Hansen said the trauma continued in court, where a defense attorney subjected her to a vicious and humiliating cross-examination, attacking her credibility, accusing her of manipulating men, and suggested she had falsely identified her attackers due to her being racist, an experience she described as worse than the physical attack itself. Real estate agent Todd Colehep became known as the Amazon Review Killer after after investigators uncovered sarcastic product reviews he had posted that referenced his real crimes. For years, he joked about using knives, chains, and shovels while remaining unidentified. In 2016, police traced the disappearance of Kayla Brown to his rural South Carolina property, where she was found alive, chained inside a shipping container after Kohlhepp had already murdered her boyfriend. A search of the land revealed multiple buried bodies, and Kohlhepp later confessed to killing 7 people between 2003 and 2016, including 4 victims in a long cold motorcycle shop massacre. Kim Stanger is a criminal law researcher in Ohio who lives with an extremely rare neurological condition that leaves her with no sense of touch, pain, or temperature. Her peripheral nerves don't transmit any sensory signals, meaning she cannot feel injuries, burns, or pressure on her body. Doctors have described her as the only living person documented with a complete loss of somatosensation at this level. As a result, Stanger must visually monitor her body at all times to avoid unknowingly injuring herself, as even severe wounds or extreme temperatures provide no physical warning. Here's a photo of Magda Goebbels with her 6 children, taken sometime before all 6 would be murdered by their own parents as Nazi Germany collapsed. Their father, Joseph Goebbels, wasn't just a high-ranking Nazi, but the architect of the regime's propaganda machine, a man responsible for saturating Germany with anti-Semitic hatred, glorifying mass murder, justifying the Holocaust, and convincing millions that extermination and total war were moral duties. He publicly called for the annihilation of Jews, celebrated civilian deaths, and demanded Germans to fight to extinction rather than surrender, even as cities burned and children starved. As Soviet forces closed in on Berlin in May of 1945, Goebbels remained fanatically loyal to Hitler, retreating with his family into the Führer bunker. There, Magda decided that her children could not live in a world without Nazism, poisoning each of them with cyanide as they slept. Afterward, Joseph and Magda reportedly took their own lives as Berlin fell and the Third Reich collapsed around them. Comedy legend Artie Lange survived one of the most self-destructive spirals in modern celebrity. In January of 2010, after years of severe heroin addiction, he stabbed himself multiple times in the abdomen inside his Hoboken apartment, collapsing from internal bleeding and barely surviving emergency surgery. His addiction later led to overdoses, constant arrests, homelessness, and the collapse of his nasal septum as a result of long-term cocaine abuse, permanently disfiguring his face. Thankfully, in recent years, Lange has said he's sober, lives mostly out of the spotlight, and prioritizes stability and health over returning to fame. In 2007, Shelley Miscavige, the wife of Scientology leader David Miscavige and once one of the organization's most powerful figures, attended her father's funeral and then completely vanished from public view. She's not been seen, photographed, or heard from publicly ever since. In 2013, actress and Scientology defector Leah Remini filed a missing persons report, prompting the LAPD to state they had located Shelley and confirmed she was alive and safe, though no evidence, images, or details were released, and no independent verification has ever occurred. Former Scientology members allege she was removed from leadership and confined to a secret church facility due to internal conflicts with David, claims which the organization vehemently denies, leaving her disappearance unresolved nearly 2 decades later.